And I'm sorry, anyone who thinks that Donald Trump would be on the side of justice is a moron.
We told you no politics, just Idaho 4, guy. Puppy.
Like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun. To dream, believe.
Let's listen to Pavarotti.
Can I be your superhero?
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And you know, the more that I analyze these transcripts from the closed hearing, the more appreciation I have not only for Ann Taylor, but her entire investigative team. And it's really kind of strange, to be real frank with you. I mean, it's almost as if, well, let's just say if her investigative team has been watching these videos, well, they sure have gained some insight, or maybe they found it all on their own. I don't know, but it's amazing the things that we focus on are things that she is annihilating those witnesses with. And the method in which she cross-examines is, I believe, unmatched. She is a beast. Let me tell you why. Because she is going through and questioning them in a way where she gets them to admit to things. And then she'll cross up the questions, go to another subject, come back to one, get them to admit to it some more. Then she'll provide them evidence and make them go, I guess I misspoke. In other words, you mean you lied. And she absolutely annihilated Rhylene Nowlin, the head of that Idaho State Police lab. Now, I've shown you in videos in the past where I went through all of the things about the IGG that Idaho had set up with Othram, and Idaho, bragging about being the first state. And it was specifically Mr. Gamet and Ms. Nowlin who was the lead people in setting that up. They were wanting to be the, the first team of people in the country to really dive headfirst into IGG investigations and really lead the way. So when you look at the facts of this case, and as it relates to that aspect, the Idaho State Police Lab has much skin in the game as it relates to this case, specifically because of the IGG aspect of it. And this testimony that we're about to go over is absolutely amazing, and it is very damaging to the prosecution's case. And I believe this is another key reason why Becca Barlow is coming on as counsel in this case, because, I mean, she's going to they're going to annihilate this DNA evidence. And they're going to be able to do it just like we've said they were going to be able to do it all along with the button snap. Now, this is a particular, I guess, this particular subject has a little extra meaning for me, because I actually got into it in my comment section with a content creator that I actually like. And we got into an argument about this particular subject. As I went through in one of my videos here in the last couple of months, I went through the fact that with the brass on the button snap, how that would accelerate the degradation of the touch DNA on that button snap because of the brass. Brass accelerates DNA degradation, but also because it was on brass, it inhibits PCR amplification. Now, if you don't know what that is the absolute key to being able to complete a sample, especially when you're talking about a low copy DNA sample, a degraded sample, like you would have found with touch DNA. Touch DNA on brass, even more so. So what PCR amplification does is it takes that minuscule sample and it makes copies of copies of copies until you can get a clear enough copy to be able to read the sample. So it's a chemical process. And brass is a major inhibitor of the PCR amplification. So it almost makes it impossible for them to do PCR amplification. And without PCR amplification, there's no way to create a profile with touch DNA, much less degraded touch DNA. So it's a double whammy. And this other particular content creator, pretty much attacked me in my comments because he said that he had already done a video explaining that they had done research and the button of the knife sheath was powder coated. So that would have insulated the brass, therefore not affecting the sample. Well, that was a pretty good argument. Now, my response was, well, you know what? That powder coating could have porous areas that would have still affected it. But the real question was it the button on the top that was powder coated, or was it the underside where the snap is? Because you see the male and the female portions of the snap on the underside has no powder coating. It is straight brass. So the big question in contention was the top of the knife sheath swab where the button was, where it's powder coated, or was it the underside where it was pure brass? And Ann Taylor absolutely annihilates Rhylene Nowlin in this respect. Gets her to lie before she gets her to admit the truth. We're going to go over that testimony now. Okay, so this is the questioning of Rhylene Nowlin, the lab manager of the Idaho State Police Forensic Lab. And I want to show you just how amazing the cross-examination by Ann Taylor is of Rhylene and how she's able to get her to admit to things and then catch her in those things that she admitted to and just annihilate the testimony and give us insight to everything we wanted to know. So you can see right here, she starts with, as a lab manager, are you aware of different bits of testing that were done related to this case? She says, in general, yes. Are you aware of a profile called Unknown Male A? Yes. Where did that come from? To my recollection, Unknown Male A came from a swab taken from a knife sheath that was submitted by Moscow Police Department. So we always assume that Unknown Male A was the DNA on the knife sheath. Now it is verified. We know whenever they refer to Unknown Male A, it is the DNA from the knife sheath. She says, are you aware of Unknown Male B? This is the DNA from the handrail going between Bethany and Dylan's room, basically. I believe that was another sample from hearing the previous testimony that was from in the house. I would only want you to testify from your own base of knowledge. From my own memory, I don't recall exactly where B was from. Fair enough. Thank you for clarifying for me. Then she switches gears. And she goes into investigative genetic genealogy and starts talking about all the policies. And she kind of gets her a little bit nervous because she hammers those policies that she knows she's aware of. And she does that for a reason, because when she gets her answering all those questions about the policies and the procedures that are in place, She gets her mind focused on answering that stuff correctly. So when she jumps back over and throws in questions about different things, she's not really prepared for them. That is an excellent technique. And the way after going through this that she does it is, I mean, it's masterful. So as she's going through talking about that, then she throws in just out of nowhere this. I need you to help me understand that a little bit. I'm having that question because I understand there was an unknown male bee found on lab item 30. Do you know what I'm talking about? No? Okay, well, I also understand that there was a cigarette butt taken from somebody in connection with the case investigation. Are you familiar with that? I am familiar with that. And that was compared to the DNA on the knife sheath. Is that right? Yes. And that was found to be excludable. Am I using that word right? It was an exclusion, correct. So what she has done in all this other testimony that I won't bore you to read is she's gotten Rhylene Nowlin to admit that she is able to compare DNA from different things to the DNA on the knife sheath. But she's also got her to admit she doesn't know anything about unknown male B or very little about it. And all of the evidence that was collected was never compared to unknown male B, only unknown male A. So the DNA from that cigarette that they got from this person was only compared to the DNA from the sheath, not unknown male B, C, or E. So, and that's what Ann Taylor is getting her to admit throughout this entire cross-examination, but she's just throwing it in here and there. And, you know, I don't believe that Ms. Nowlin even realized what's happening. So then she takes and she goes back in a different direction, starts talking about the trash pull and kind of gets her all messed up there. And then out of nowhere, she throws in, okay, male B was also a mixture, wasn't it? Because she was talking about the mixture of DNA found in Kohberger's trash. And she says, I don't know. Okay, if it was designated as unknown male B, again, I don't know if it was from a mixed sample or not. So now we've entered the fact that unknown male B on the handrail was more than likely a mixed sample. So folks, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that if unknown male B on the handrail was a mixed sample, it was a mixed sample of blood. So we're talking about not only just a spot of blood on the handrail, we're now talking about a spot of blood that was likely mixed with the victim's blood. So you think that's not important for them to explore further? Then she goes back in another direction, and then she starts in on this. Now, I want to talk about what we're talking about when we say the sheath. You're familiar with what happened with the sheath for swabbing, is that right? I've seen the sheath and I know how our laboratory performs swabbing of evidence, but I did not swab that item of evidence, nor did I see it being swabbed. As I understand it though, you've read the lab notes. And remember, in their expert disclosure, they said that their experts would be testifying to what other people did as far as the actual work in the case. And these experts are just going to be testifying to their lab notes. So this is brilliant. She says, you have seen the lab notes, right? Because you're really going to be one of the ones testifying to this stuff based on lab notes. At one point, I believe I did read the notes. I think I was asked a question and the analyst was out of town or something. And I think you answered that question to law enforcement after consulting somebody else who was the swabber when the sheath was swabbed. Is that right? It sounds familiar. Yeah, so you maybe not did it, but you asked the person that did it and they said where they swabbed it. If I understand the lab reports, it's a single source on the knife sheath. Is that right? Correct. Does that mean it's only one person in that area? Yes, that was detected through our testing. Tell me where you think that sheath was swabbed for purposes of DNA collection. I believe the analyst swabbed the there's kind of a snap or a button that was the top of the snap. And that's the area that was swabbed. There were other areas on it sampled as well. Now, hold on just a second, folks, because this is what's going to be scary about this situation. If a guilter goes through, or even somebody that thinks they're helping and are lazy, if they go through and they read this right here, they're likely to say, we now know that they took the DNA from the top of the knife sheath, from the button, and that was powder coated. Some dummy will actually do this, I guarantee it, and then they will use this and say that verifies it. This is actually Ann Taylor getting Rhylene Nowlin right here to admit to a lie. For the purposes of unknown male A that you're telling us later came back to Bryan Kohberger, that's the only place I want to talk about right now, meaning that area. Are we on top of the button, the outside, or on the inside, the socket portion of the button? Now, you know this is very important to Ann Taylor because the outside is powder coated, the inside is straight brass. So she's trying to uncover this stuff or get her to admit it. Now, what does Rhylene Nowlin say? I know on the top. I know is a definitive answer, and she just screwed herself. I know on the top. She's saying, I know it was the top. It was the powder coated button. I don't recall if she swabbed the underside or not. I'd have to look at her notes again, but I know the top. She just got her to say, I know it was the top of the button. Guilters will take that, run with it all day, but you got to hold on because she just got her to admit to a lie. Do you know if that sheath was part of that preserved for fingerprinting? The swabbing was done first. It's our laboratory standard order of processing. If DNA is needed in fingerprints, they will work together, essentially latents. Fingerprints will say we can see some possible ridge detail. So if you can avoid this area after DNA says we want to swab this, and they come to a decision of what would best suit that item of evidence to determine where to swab. So the swabbing takes place first. So she gets her to admit it was the top twice and explain why it was the top. And then she says, I don't think I have any other questions for you right now. Thank you. So that should be the end of it, right? This is how slick Ann Taylor is, I'm telling you. So then the court says, okay, no more questions. Mr. Nye, you can question the witness. Nye gets up and he starts questioning her, and he's going through, and he's just basically worried about, any medical information, because he knows if any medical information was looked into, then that would violate the Fourth Amendment. But then at the end here, he says, now question, you also gave some testimony about the knife sheath and the swabs on the knife sheath. Do you recall that? Yes. And I know you don't recall exactly where the knife sheath was swabbed, but we've been talking about policies. Do your policies or best practices suggest where a knife sheath or an item like that should be swabbed for DNA? No, it would be impossible for our analytical methods to cover how to swab or where to swab every single item of evidence. We receive quite a wide variety of items in the laboratory, so it's the analyst's job as a scientist, as a practitioner in forensic biology screening, and as a DNA analyst to know what they're targeting. So on this item, I believe there was also blood. Okay, so now we know there was blood on the knife sheath as well. So they would have been targeting that separate and then also trying to determine who may have handled that. So they would have specifically honed in on that area that whoever handled it would have had to touch and maybe touched repeatedly. So Nye asks her about where the thing was swabbed, and she reinforces the fact that it should have been on the top, on the button that was powder coated. Guilters are still going to go, okay, yeah, that's why it's the top. It's powder coated. She admitted it. Let's see. So if I'm understanding correctly, the analyst is swabbing the places that would most likely have that touch DNA. She says, correct. Mr. Nye, no further questions. The court redirect. Miss Taylor, thank you. Now, Miss Taylor, now that she has got her to admit it, Nye has got her to admit it twice. Now it's the redirect. Now Miss Taylor is going to come in, and this is what I call closing the deal, y'all. Redirect examination. They took a little break. She comes right back in. Watch this. We were talking at the end of my questions, and where was Mr. Nye just left off with you about where the sheath would have been swabbed. Reading the email that's been placed in front of you, does that refresh your recollection about what you believe to be the place on the sheath that was swabbed? Look at her answer. Very much so. Uh-oh. Did Ed Taylor just slap an email in front of you, Miss Nowlin, and show you that you just lied and made a ASS out of you and Mr. Nye that just got up and tried to back up your BS? Where was it swabbed? The knife was swabbed the entire, this is how nervous she was. Now she's saying the knife was swabbed. The judge jumps in. Did you say the knife was swabbed? Laugh out loud. The witness, all nervous and jittery because of that email Ann Taylor just slapped in front of her. Sorry, the knife sheath. Am I allowed to read it? By Miss Taylor. You're supposed to read it and then let it refresh your recollection and then not read it, but just tell me a summary of where it was. The entire leather portion of the strap, both top and bottom, and then the underside of the button. I misspoke. No, you lied, Ms. Nowlin. You didn't misspeak. You lied until you got that proof put right in front of your face in the form of an email. She did not swab the top of the button because that was determined to be the most likely place for fingerprints to be found. Uh-oh. So you lied the whole time. You get an email. Now you have to admit you lied. You say you misspoke. But what is the real facts, folks? She did not swab the top of the button because that was determined to be the most likely place for fingerprints to be found. The underside of the button, was it the part that the sticky part would go into, or the sticky part, or the sticky out part, or both? Nice words. I can't tell from this. I would have to look at her notes. Okay, good enough. Thank you. So it doesn't matter if it's the sticky part that goes in, the male, or the sticky part it goes in, the female, because both of those are pure brass. And Ed Taylor not only got her to admit that the DNA on the knife sheath was found on the brass portions of the button snap, but she got her to lie about it being on that powder-coated button 3 times before she got her to tell the truth. That is what you call brilliant cross-examination. All you out there dogging Ann Taylor, you need to dog yourselves. You don't know nothing. So why was that testimony so critical? Well, number one, she got Rhylene Nowlin, the head of the ISP lab, to lie under oath twice. And then when she put evidence in front of her face, she had to admit that she misspoke. No, you admit that you lied, and you're not very credible when you're talking about evidence in the case. But the critical part is for later at trial. The only evidence they have against Bryan Kohberger is the DNA on the button snap of the knife sheath. This testimony right here is so critical because of what brass does to DNA. And you can see up here on this knife sheath, this is what they're referring to, this portion. Let's take a look at the differences between the top and the button snap. So when you zoom in on this button, you see it right here. This is powder coated, and it's powder coated with a paint coating, and that would have protected the touch DNA on that snap, on that button, from being affected greatly by the brass or the bronze that button is made of. So that is a very important determination, because the touch DNA would have lived longer on that button, and it would not have been affecting the PCR amplification if this is where they swabbed the sheath and found the DNA. But you can clearly see that on the male portion of the snap right here and on the female portion of the snap right here, there is zero powder coating. It is straight brass. It would annihilate that touch DNA to the point to there's no way they could pull a complete sample. And not only that, because the brass directly interferes with the PCR amplification, it wouldn't even likely produce a partial sample. And this is the evidence that we're going to have going into trial that's going to be affecting their only connection from Bryan Kohberger to the crime scene. This is the key piece of evidence that they're going to be using to say his STR profile from his buccal swab matched the DNA found on this, which in real world terms, with all the circumstances with this brass, they could match anybody's STR profile to this, because this thing is ambiguous, which means it'll match anybody because there's nothing on it. It's gone. It was deteriorated. It's proof. Man, you talk about a kid in a candy store, and that is your guy Pav right now. Because, I mean, there's some things that I didn't think we would ever really learn in this case. I mean, even at trial. For example, was the button snap swabbed on the button that was powder coated or on the underside that was brass? I don't think we'd ever know that. Ed Taylor went through and uncovered it in a hearing. It's on the record now from the prosecution's expert. They got the DNA off of the button snap that was brass. She's got it. It's proven now. Vicar Barlow's going to be able to absolutely annihilate their main piece of evidence. It's just, this is wonderful. But she got her to lie 3 times before she got her to tell the truth. And this is the DNA expert of the Idaho State Police lab. This is the director of the lab. And the other thing we learned is even the guy, they went and they got his cigarette butt. Wonder who that guy was. They created a profile from his cigarette butt. I wonder if that cigarette butt was found in, the jailhouse. I wonder if they gave one of those guys in the jailhouse like Farley a cigarette, and they took the butt off of his cigarette and went and tried to compare it to the DNA off of the knife sheath that, quite frankly, they could have said matched, because the DNA on the knife sheath would match anybody because it's ambiguous. But they never compared that DNA from the cigarette butt to unknown male B, D, or probably C. So, and she got her to basically admit that as well. But not only that, the DNA on the handrail, now we find out it was a mixed sample. Was it mixed with the blood of one of the victims? If it was, then this is some devious stuff going on, because if they've got unknown male blood mixed with one of the victim's blood, they can deconvolute that mixture and figure out who that person is. And they didn't do that. I mean, they should really be ashamed of themselves. But kid in a candy store right here, right now, Ann Taylor is a beast. Don't let anybody out there try to steer you otherwise, because the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the pudding. And don't let the judge's rulings go against your opinion, because when you read the rulings from the judge, I mean, he is just straight taking every piece of evidence and explaining it away. And the most egregious example of that, I believe, is because Ann Taylor has been trying to get the grand jury subpoenas forever, and she can't get them. And she's brought up several times she gets them in every other case. She can't understand why she doesn't get them in this case. Well, when you read the judge's opinions of denying the Franks motion, when he gets to one of them, as it relates to those grand jury subpoenas, the judge literally says, I'm denying this aspect of the motion because the defense cannot produce the grand jury subpoenas. He was denying it because the defense cannot produce the grand jury subpoenas because the prosecution won't turn them over to her. You're denying the motion because the defense couldn't get something in discovery from the prosecution and produce it for you in the argument. And you're denying it because she can't produce it. And she can't produce it because the prosecution won't give it to her because you won't make them give it to her. Man, how you sleep at night, Judge Hippler. I guess those little caricatures that I make of Judge Hippler are pretty accurate. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. And until next time, Pavarotti's out.
Thank you.